All right, as we change over here, what I want to let you know is at the end of this, Mark's going to kind of wrap up where we are in the project and give you just a little taste of the data. We actually intend in the college, and we'll work on this summer, to write papers based upon our findings. And I shared some of this data yesterday with the Rotary group here in Pocatello. And we're hoping to move forward with some other really innovative ideas as well. And then at the end, we'll both stand up here and we'll both be willing to ask or take questions as well regarding anything associated with the project. So, I mean, there's things that we made, choices we made, like why did we choose Apple, and why did we, choose to use it in certain areas, and whatnot. So we're happy to talk to you a little bit about why we approach things the way we did in terms of, I guess, the structure of the program. Okay. Yeah, and just up on here.
Okay, so just to let you know, I also am teaching in the iPad project. So it was kind of interesting since I was given the charge of evaluating the first semester last fall that I was also a participant. So that was actually very beneficial to me to see what other folks are doing. And actually, I'm not as creative with the iPad as the three faculty that you just saw, but I have very much enjoyed it. So as Candy started off this afternoon, she talked about that we wanted a data-driven approach. So as I came on to this project probably last August, the basic idea was to have faculty submit proposals, to monitor the project throughout the semesters, to not just essentially let things go, but to actually every few weeks have discussions and those kind of things. And I'd also add that part of Candy's philosophy was this is very ground up. Right? It's not a top-down, it's from the bottom up, I guess is a better way of saying it. So we had very much a bottom-up philosophy, and we wanted experimentation in the classroom, those kind of things. Okay? So my job, though, is put together a final report and an executive summary, which is now completed for the first semester. So the way we did this assessment was faculty first had to submit a formal proposal, and that was reviewed by the college. We had a start of the semester meeting, I think, the week before classes started. And that first meeting, several of the faculty at that meeting are here today. It was kind of a, what do we do with these iPads to some degree. Some folks knew more than others. I was one of those who I had no idea really how I was going to use the iPad, right? But that was actually a good way to start, again, from the bottom up. We then had a midterm assessment and meeting, right? And so the survey that you're going to see some of the results in a few minutes, that survey really came out of that midterm assessment because we brainstormed how we were using the iPads, how students were reacting, and that led to the survey development. Okay, and then we had an end of semester meeting and assessment. Okay, so the assessments essentially were faculty would actually submit reports, and that ended up in the final document. Right? And then we did a survey. And it was just a post-test survey. This semester, we're actually doing a pre-test and a post-test, right? Because we needed the first semester to kind of get some ideas of what we wanted to test. Okay, so our research questions, right? Academics, we have to have research questions. Just two simple questions. What are the for this first semester for the fall of 2013? What are the different ways to use the iPads in the classroom? So you've seen three very different ways, very distinct ways. Today, and so we wanted to learn how can we use the iPad in the classroom, right? Because that was a goal of this project, and we wanted a bottom-up approach. And then number two, how do students react to the iPad as a pedagogical tool, right? Are they excited? Do they like it? Do they learn? Those are things that we didn't know last August. Okay, so this is some of the data. I'm going to just show you some of the results of the surveys. Even though we have faculty input, we have student comments, we have lots of information, I'm just going to give you some quick data today. Okay, so 69 students completed the survey in the fall of 2013, and this is a good demonstration of how we met different class levels, everything from 1,000 level courses all the way up to 6,000 seminars were represented in the iPad pilot project in the fall. Okay. The different ways that the iPads were used in class, Okay, and if you can't see this, I'll help you read. I'll read some of this to you. These are categories that were brainstormed in the midterm meeting in October of 2013. And so what faculty came up with roughly 10 ways that they were using the iPads in the classroom. And then we tested the students on these questions. And their top 5 ways that they felt the iPad was used in the classroom was hands-on applications. So that would include the drawing that Laura does. It would do the photography that Yolanda does. Blogging, right? That was number 1. Discovery, which is just going out and discovering things. Multiple learning styles. Multiple media use. Data collection. Okay? And I think some of Laura's students would be in those real popular categories as well. Okay? So those are the ways that the iPad was used in the classroom. Here's some data, a whole bunch of data for you to look at. I tried to highlight the ones that were, I think, most interesting and surprising, right? So the questions were, as a pedagogical strategy, how did the iPad work, right? And did it emphasize critical thinking? Did it emphasize enhancing participation in the classroom? So notice 69% of students thought it enhanced critical thinking, 67% thought it enhanced collaboration, 67% thought it enhanced participation, 66% thought it would assist students in future careers, right? 74% of students understood the purpose of the iPad in the classroom. Okay? We were also concerned about the question of distraction. So would it be distracting? Students would be on Facebook all the time or something. That wasn't the case, as you heard from our 3 faculty today. Only 33% of students thought it was distracting. When you break this data out and you look at who maybe had a not so good experience with the iPad project, you can go to this question, the technologically savvy question. There was a certain percent of students, 12% felt that they were, 18% of students, roughly 12 of our 69 students, felt that they were not technologically savvy. So then when you break out this data, the students who struggled were the students who were afraid of technology. Okay? And I had some of that in my classroom, and I think I've addressed that better this semester. Okay? So these are some pie charts of what I just showed you. These are Candy's pie charts. They look a lot better than my bar graphs, right? But what's interesting is when Candy and I looked at this data, as we started to write the report, we started to think about this initiative in the college to promote the liberal arts and careers, right? That making connections between those two and the central importance of liberal arts education in careers. And these are all things that are mentioned in the literature that Candy started today's presentation with. These things are mentioned, and notice that these were the strongest elements of the outcomes of the classes mentioned by students: critical thinking, being technologically savvy, collaboration in class, and career development. Okay, and then as a pedagogical tool, right? Notice as faculty, we're always wanting to try to increase student engagement, increase participation. The iPad worked very well in both of those areas, right? And we know that active learning is better than passive learning. Okay, so as I was completing the report, the literature that I found on mobile technology and the iPad in the classroom all said that the iPad will not work unless you have some kind of pedagogical strategy, right? If you just show up and say, okay, turn on the iPad, we're going to do some things, it's not going to work, okay? So what was so interesting about the 3 presentations today was each faculty member had a very distinct way of using the iPad, right? And what I'm most interested in is the pedagogy that was used in these 3 classes and in the entire project. So some of the pedagogical strategies that were identified: repetition in multiple pathways. So that's really what Amy is talking about, right, with the notion of repetition and creating connections in the brain. Peer review and collaborations, active learning, experiential learning, problem solving. Okay, my classes do a lot of number 3. Multiple learning styles, right? Students need to see things and hear things and do things in different ways, right? and providing context in the real world, right? And so you can see that in all three presentations. You can see most of those pedagogical strategies in all three of today's presentations. Okay, so what we learned, well, first, the iPads can help faculty enhance and refine pedagogy. So to me, that is what's so interesting, because we sometimes can just use technology for the sake of using technology, right? But what we're actually doing here is we're improving pedagogy in the college, which I think is really, really neat. iPads can help students in career development, critical thinking, and collaboration, all crucial things in a liberal arts education and in a career, right? And then the one kind of recommendation is students would benefit from additional training, right? Because the students with limited tech skills were the most unsatisfied with the iPad. I think in my class, I figured out how to do some peer mentoring, those kind of things, at the front end of the class this semester that I didn't do last semester. And so I think that, and I think most of the faculty that I've talked to have figured out how to help students who are afraid of technology. So that is the results of our survey and some of our assessment. And I'll take questions, and Candy will come up here and take questions. I have to tie my shoe because my shoe is untied. And I'm going to trip. At any time, I'm going to fall. So I will give this to Candy.
All right. What kind of questions can we answer for you all regarding our iPad project? Yes.
I see a lot of still life. I really like the way Amy was talking about real time and doing things as they were happening. Is there any oral capability in the iPads, like Skyping or anything where the kids can talk to each other in an oral situation?
Absolutely. And matter of fact, are you guys comfortable if I have you share your experiences in terms of the languages? Okay.
So briefly, what I have used the iPads in my medical Spanish class because I teach it with Idaho Falls, and we have an awful lot of conversation. So I just simply say, okay, let's get a couple iPads, and the person in Idaho Falls doesn't have a partner, so they have to Skype with the person down in Pocatello, and it just works out beautifully. So I've got it set for Skype.
Yeah, so one of the things we're struggling with is with our upper division language courses and having students at multiple sites and it being a conversational class and everybody getting the same opportunity to have a conversation and to practice using the language on whatever they were assigned to do.
Right, and the issue is that a lot of times you'll have, your 15 students here in Pocatello and one in Idaho Falls and one in Twin Falls, and so they have nobody to talk to. So we just have with Idaho Falls right now, the people in charge of the distance learning, they just bring the iPad and pop it in the classroom, and I bring it, and we don't use it every single day. Sometimes we don't have to, but we use it often.
Yeah, so you kind of pair people off, if I understand, and then somebody gets paired off with the Idaho Falls student, and that's how you manage that conversation is using Skype. And the other thing that's interesting too, I believe there's dictionaries. There are so many things we've done. We worked really hard in the college to make sure that people were given the opportunities to use the technology really in what I think of as our three areas, so the arts, the humanities, and the social and behavioral sciences. And we've just given you a little bit of what's happened. I mean, foreign language has been very much involved in this project. And so there's a lot more knowledge than what we've been able to impart today in 2 hours. Yes.
I just want to know how we can become involved in this in the future then.
That is a great question. Well, in our college, we put out calls every semester for folks to use the limited number of iPads that I purchased. I'm hoping that over time, other colleges will begin to invest in this technology, and we have all the connections. Our Apple person has left, Tyler has left, but we have the connections to help. I'd really like to see, in particular, if I have it my way, to see health professions get very involved in this. My niece is actually in a medical program, a graduate medical program at Yale, and she is using it for patient education. They're using it when they're engaging in dissection and cadaver work. They're using the atlases, so there's tons of opportunity there. Not in my area, I mean, not my college, but I would love to see that and to facilitate those conversations. And I will say Apple has been a great partner with us, and to facilitate the purchase of those iPads in our college going forward, we actually have a link on our college website where people can actually donate specifically to this project. But that takes a lot of time to gather that kind of money, and we certainly promoted it this last year when our phone-a-thon. But I think eventually what we're going to need in our college anyways is a corporate sponsor so that we can get a one-to-one match. So if we can get somebody to donate money for an iPad, then we can actually also purchase one. That's really where I want to go. But we're happy to share our knowledge. I don't know for sure what college you're from, but we would love to share and have you be a part of our conversations.
In the future, are you going to ask the students to buy their own iPads?
You know, that's a great question. We don't have any plans to manage it in that way currently. Right now, the college purchased 180 iPads and then some really great carts to charge them and to help us facilitate the use of them. My thought is, and keep in mind, this is my thought, it hasn't been approved by upper administration or anything, but I think there are certain programs where students would benefit specifically from the use of these iPads, and so I wouldn't mind seeing the iPad bundled. So part of why we chose the iPad, and I was hoping somebody would kind of ask this question, so you've given me an opportunity to answer something here. The reason why we chose one technology was because it's a lot easier for a unit to manage one technology. We could have probably used anything. The iPad had the two advantages that I told you before with the testing center, okay? But it's a lot easier to have everybody on board to use that technology and ones that everybody could be comfortable with. So I think if the university invests in a particular form of technology and does it consistently, that would be most ideal. I even went to student affairs last year because we've been worried about enrollment and retention, and I said, we could be the first school in Idaho where we bundle that with their tuition. So I think that would be fantastic, but not my decision. But we do have programs, smaller programs, where we're using this technology so much that it may end up becoming part of a graduate tuition in a program. Other questions? Well, I want to thank you all so very much for, we have a question? Laura.
It's maybe a large question, but from the beginning till now, but what has surprised you two the most about having the iPads?
I think what surprised me the most is I was really hoping to see positive outcomes from the students, but I thought it would take multiple semesters before I would see the facilitation of those liberal arts skills that every employer says they want. I didn't show you a slide, but when I spoke yesterday at Rotary, I took data that was collected by the American Academy of Universities and Colleges, and they surveyed employers to see what they really wanted, and 4 out of 5 said it didn't matter what your major was as long as you could critically think, collaborate, communicate. And so I pulled that data out. That wasn't completely the reason why we came up with those questions the way we did, for those of you that participated in our mid-semester meeting, but the data was all there, so I pulled them to look to see whether or not we facilitated those skills. And I think that was what was most surprising, is that in a very short period of time, we had affected change, that we developed the skills with the students of today who are very technologically savvy. We developed those skills in a short period of time, and we re-engaged them. And I think your class is a fine example of that. It's very easy in today's world for students to become distracted, for students to be focusing on what they have to do after class, or technology that they have with them, or almost anything else, okay, other than the content that we are providing them. And I loved the way this flipped the classroom. Maybe that's my other most important, the other point was that we flipped the classroom. We had students doing things outside of class that we have begged, plead, bartered to try to get them to do. Okay, they didn't want to do those things. They didn't want to watch this video. They didn't want to read this article. They didn't want to engage in the project, but they did because they knew they got to come to class and do something cool with it. Okay, and so I think those were probably my two biggest surprises. Mark, you wrote the executive summary. What was the biggest surprise for you?
Well, I just think the different ways that faculty use the iPads surprised me. And I think that first, so that one, the slide where we have the different uses, and that came out of the October meeting. So in August, many of us were, not all of us, but some of us were struggling. What are we going to do with these things, right? And the multiple ways that faculty use the iPads was most interesting to me. You know, these three were just excellent presentations, but I bet we have another 5 or 6, 7 faculty who could also give very good presentations, who used iPads in totally different ways and had different experiences and different pedagogical strategies. So to me, that was what was most surprising.
And maybe as a follow-up, did you expect to see presentations like this today when you came? Did you expect that these were the kinds of things? The results or the tool? So for me, seeing what, for instance, even what Yolanda did from time 1 to time 2 with her students, because she presented at our college advisory board in the fall, and it was great, and the students came and talked about how engaged they were, and the advisory board went crazy. It was fantastic. But to even see how more sophisticated your approach to using the technology and how you're better able, and Mark yourself, as you described, better able to leverage it a second time around. And so that's the kind of growth. I mean, you know, we got to remember our students are indeed going to eventually need to get jobs. And so they need to have skills that they see as being transformative. Remember that word on the earlier slides? And this is a way to transform the liberal arts, at least from my perspective.
So you mentioned flipping the classroom a couple of times, and I have actually been working on that in my own classrooms. And I don't know if people are familiar with flipping the classroom. Okay. But without the iPads, I've just been doing activities in class. So I'm wondering, people who have taught in this way, have you found that since you're using that extra time in class for activities, that you're having to do things like tape lectures and put those online and get students to do things outside of the class that they're typically doing? You know, have you had to flip it?
So,
Yeah, because my English class, I used to do a lot more discussion-based inside class, and I really did have to shift a lot of their homework to make sure that they were getting, like, so their homework outside of class shifted to say, okay, read this, answer these kinds of questions, come up with your own kinds of questions, and come to class a lot more prepared. And then we would do things to manipulate them. But if they hadn't done the reading, we couldn't do as much. You know, we just, so I just kept increasing the worth of the things they did out of class and making them more specific and saying, okay, you have to come to class with these things. And they really did respond really well to that.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to get back to where you were talking about you have seen the change in the critical thinking, the collaboration, and communication. And my question is assessment. Like, how did you assess that? Did you just rely on the survey data that the students of their self-perceived improvement, or anecdotal evidence? I'm sure observationally, you know, in the classroom you can see that they're thinking critically and things like that, but just how did you record or assess that?
That is an excellent question. So you need to remember that most of the folks who participate in the project, the instructors, have taught these classes before and worked with students. So because we didn't want to overstructure things to begin with, and we really did want this to be more organic, is the word that I often use, we came into it mid-semester with the first assessment, which was a survey, and we really wanted the student perspective, because I had the faculty members' perspective. They all wrote summaries of their use of the technology and how it benefited their students. So right now, most of our data, with the exception of the survey, and now we're doing it pre and post, is qualitative data, which we are coding and using it in that way. And the College actually of Arts and Letters also has kind of a focus on narrative, so that's a really great way for us to utilize a strength that we have. But going beyond that, we are moving more and more quantitatively towards that, and so that's why we're trying to show you some of our preliminary data. Clearly, from what we're hearing and seeing from folks, and when we look objectively at grades and performance, and like I told you, we have in the data set, we have classes that were taught, the same class was taught face-to-face without the technology as with the technology, so we can make some of those comparisons, and we'll do more of that as we move forward. So it's preliminary, but we're getting there.
Great. I just wanted to also say thanks to each and every one of you. Some of folks have had an opportunity to meet with the various Apple representatives when they have been here, when they've done their workshops. And like Candy mentioned, they're going to be doing more of those this summer. So again, to work with such a corporate, socially responsible entity is very, very powerful. Their sustainability with us is just, it's just incredible, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing to make them feel welcome.
As a follow-up to that too, I need to actually say thank you to ITRC as well. Yeah, all the faculty are saying yes, because they have been our problem solvers. They have been our partners. There are times when people question my sanity when we decided to do this, and they became really our advocate and our helper and our partner in every way. They've put on cafes, Genius Cafes, to try to facilitate discussions about the use of mobile technology. And even most recently, Blake has been kind enough to be part of a project where they're bringing some Apple TVs to campus. And when I first mentioned to IT that we wanted to use Apple on a campus that has very little Apple technical support, that wasn't very popular, and it really was the partnership with ITRC and with Blake and his team that allowed us to move in that direction so that we could be successful, and they continue to support us, and allowed us today to share with you something we're very proud of in the College of Arts and Letters. So thank you all very much, and thank you to our presenters and to my partner in crime, Mark.